about our country. And we are from a country which is supposed to have been independent now for almost 5 decades. That is a very long time. But for 5 decades, our main food, which is rice, we import 90% of that, and we produce only 10%. That is how much we are independent. If your staple food, you produce only 10% of that, and we import 90%, and you call yourself an independent nation, there are many questions that you have to answer, because this is total dependence on an outside world. And this is a country which is considered to be par excellence an agricultural country, where you can produce everything that you import. And in fact, you should export what you are importing. But 50 years of our so-called independence, we are still struggling to even have enough to eat, let alone to export. And for 50 years, the very thing that we fought for, that is sovereignty. We wanted to be sovereign. We wanted our country to be a sovereign country. And for 50 years, that sovereignty of the country and ourselves are trampled afoot. And we yet continue to call ourselves independent and sovereign people. We call ourselves a republic. And for 50 years, the tool without which we cannot develop, that is education, is still as rotten as anything, as one principal of one of the most recognized high schools in the Gambia told me. 2 days before I came here, I discussed with him. In his office, he said, "My friend, education here is rotten." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because it is examination oriented and it's not knowledge based." So it means that our kids, who are supposed to be the future leaders of this country or the continent itself, or Gambia, for example, are not being given the tools necessary to make Gambia a better place than what it is today. In fact, the future of Gambia is gloomy. Because even not only that they are not being given the right type of education, but now everybody in the Gambia is looking, aspiring to go out of the Gambia. Now people in grade 11, grade 12, if they have the opportunity, they go out of the Gambia. In search of what? In search of what they call greener pastures. So we are in a very critical situation in that country. And if you think of health service, for 50 years, critical conditions of sickness cannot be treated in the Gambia. They have to be referred to an outside country for treatment. But who can afford to go to any country outside the Gambia for treatment? Your airfare alone is monumental. Let us talk about the cost of treatment in that country. If you go to RVTH now, you go to their records, there are hundreds and hundreds of patients who have been referred to the outside world, but they have not been. I know a niece who has kidney problem. Both kidneys are problematic. For the last 7 years, she's been given a document to say that she could not be treated in the Gambia but outside. Well, the husband does not even have enough to make her survive. Even in that critical condition, she has to sit down, and she's forbidden to sit down for London, but she has to, because otherwise she will not survive. Because the husband went to Spain, could not do anything. She was a so-called marabout there and was getting nothing. She had to do everything to fend for herself. And therefore she sat down to this knitting, knits hats and other materials and sells them for her survival. Which means that that's even making her condition worse. And there are many like her, some with liver conditions and other critical conditions which cannot be treated in the country. Regime after regime, they came and claimed that they would do better. This one, when they came, they said they would do better. And for the last 18 years, now we are going to 20 years, the health condition, the health facilities remain the same. Proof is that when they get sick themselves, and this is what I wonder what type of people we are. Because I take you as my employee. A president is an employee. An MP is an employee. All elected offices are employee positions. And then I entrust you with our resources for you to manage them in such a way that you create conditions for me to live better. Now you build health facilities, but you have no faith in those health facilities. Your wife is pregnant, time for delivery, she has to go to the United States to deliver. You are sick, you go out to France or to United States or to anywhere else outside the Gambia for treatment. But those who put you in that position do not have the means to go to those places. They cannot afford to even to go to Senegal, let alone to go to Paris or London. And you see, we are living in these conditions and people remain uncritical about all these things. What is wrong? There is something fundamentally wrong. And what is fundamentally wrong, that's what I was arguing with those people yesterday on Fatu Radio. Because our people are not empowered. Because our people are denied the right to know, the right to be informed, the right to be informed in such a way that no one will be allowed to throw dust into their eyes. Regime after the regime is to keep them at bay for their own interests, for their own purposes. What is there now has transformed virtually every Gambian into a farmer for himself. Even in feudal times, I have never seen in the Gambia any leader who makes or who made everybody in the Gambia to do farming for him. But that is current in the Gambia, and it is fashionable. People take pleasure. People who cannot even farm for themselves to survive, they go and farm for a person. They are paying monthly $52,000, and then there is a special budget for his livelihood. If he likes, he will kill a bull today for lunch. Tomorrow, evening time, he'll kill a ram for supper. Breakfast, a goat. You spend all your life through the whole 12 months, you will not even be able to buy one bonga fish. But your employee is living like a monarch over you. And you take pleasure in thinking about that. There is something fundamentally wrong. That is why we created the party that we now are running. I was in the civil service when I came from France, and I posted myself to the Curriculum Development Center against the wish of my director, who wanted to post me to the president's office at the time. And I refused, because I said my qualifications were not useful in that office. They were useful in the Curriculum Development Center because there was something to be done there, and they could not do it since 1975. I went there towards end of 1978, and from 75 to 78, that which was supposed to be done could not be done because there was nobody with that qualification. I went there, and in enthusiasm, I started working, even though he told me he would not pay me if I went there. And I said, yes. I went, and true, for 3 months I was not paid, even though I went to France on study leave without salary. So when I came back, normally I should have been paid my usual salary before I went. But he denied me that for 3 months. I didn't care about it because I was very enthusiastic about the new thing that I was doing, the promotion of our development and promotion of our own languages. Government had a policy, clear policy on it, but they were not prepared to implement their own policy. So after all that we did there, I realized that this government is not prepared to implement their own policies. And I was not prepared to sit down there, people thinking that Sidia was doing something, when in actual fact, I was not doing something because they didn't want me to do anything. We wrote books which were supposed to be printed, they were not printed. And we decided to write everything calligraphically with hand for the first phase of our experimental classes. But we couldn't continue to write books with hand throughout. And we could not monitor our classes because we did not have any means of transport. The director was using the transport for the center as if it were his own personal property. So therefore, I resigned in 1986. I'm just making things very short. And joined hands with my colleagues to form a party because I realized that we could not do anything solid unless there was a transformation. And the only thing that could bring about transformation is to get into politics and create a political party. I had never belonged to any political party in the Gambia until when we created one. All my family were members of PPP. I was the only one, even though I was going to school at the time. I was never ever supporting any party in the Gambia because for me, it was only a name that differentiated them, but in practice, they were all the same. And you can say the same thing today. Even today, the same thing prevails. So so you would ask me, now, if you put your party in charge of the affairs of the Gambia, what would you do? First, the most important thing that is to be done in the Gambia is to establish the sovereignty of our republic and the sovereignty of the Gambian people. You know what has been happening in the Gambia, or what is still happening? There is a so-called republic which is not sovereign, and therefore there are no sovereign people. How can you have a republic without people who are sovereign? Then you have a sham republic. Because Gambian people are not sovereign. And you will agree with me, they are not sovereign. Why? Because you elect a president. You are paying him what you would not earn yourself. And that president comes to you, not behind your back, and faces you and say, if you don't do this, I will not do anything to serve you. As if what he has is his personal money. He's forgotten that the coffers of the nation are under his management. But because you also have a parliament which is just a parliament in name and not a parliament in reality, the coffers that he is in charge of do not serve you as they are supposed to serve you. Today, more than 60% of the Gambian people are wallowing in poverty. If you go to their own official statistics, more than 60% of the people are living in poverty. Even though they had had many poverty interventions in the country. But the problem with those interventions, as I once told a minister of finance, was that you go to a village, you say you are going to help them alleviate their poverty. You lend them $60,000 to be paid in 6 months with an interest of 25%. Are you helping them to alleviate poverty, or are you going to aggravate their poverty? Because when the time comes for paying that money, they don't have it. What do? The little livestock they have, they sell to pay, which means that you have brought them, if you have made them even poorer than when you brought your loan. Can you imagine you bring $60,000 in the sharing of that money? Well, some people were giving $5 because that's what they can manage, that's what they can pay. You give a woman $5. What do you expect that woman to do with $5 to alleviate her poverty? You are even pumping her into poverty. You know? So this is the type of intervention, poverty alleviation intervention they have been carrying out in the country, and therefore instead of alleviating poverty, they were aggravating poverty. We say that the only way to address the issue of poverty in our country, is to address the issue of investing into the productive sectors of our economy. Agriculture is the most important industry in the Gambia. Why can't government invest into that productive sector? By making it possible for farmers to buy fertilizer, because fertility of land has gone down to naught for centuries of cultivating the same place. A bag of fertilizer today in the Gambia is more than $1,000. A farmer is thinking of buying a bag of rice. If you give that farmer 1,000 to buy a bag of fertilizer, he will go and buy rice. So in other words, even though he may have a big farm, because of the infertility of the land, he will not yield more, he will not have a good yield. So we say, you make that possible by linking cooperative banking to agriculture, making it possible for farmers to have access to soft loans in order for them to be able to buy their farming inputs, and also make it possible for them to have their produce marketed. I tell you that the last year produce of groundnuts, if you go into the Gambia today with a truck, as far as my district is concerned, you go to any big village, you'll fill it with tons of groundnuts. Last year's season was a disaster. Farmers' groundnuts are still on board in large amounts everywhere in the Gambia. And this is what they must sell to pay their taxes. This is what they must sell to pay their children's school fees. This is what they must pay to be able to incur the expenses for their hospital treatments. But if they are unsold, unmarketed, what do you expect? You see, poverty level in the Gambia is such that there are people who get sick and they don't go to the hospital because they cannot afford. Now, the consultation fee has been raised from $5 to $25. And if you pay $25, God help you. After consultation, the best you can get is a prescription to go to a pharmacy to buy drugs, and drugs are terribly expensive. All those quality, good drugs other than paracetamol and aspirin, you can hardly get them in the hospital. You have to go and buy. I remember my brother, younger brother, was sick, very sick, and eventually he died. I took him to RBTH then. The doctor looked at him and was prescribing. He laughed. He said, "But Honorable, you cannot get this drug here. You have to go." I said, "I know." But how many people can go and do that? So in other words, they don't go because going there is as useless as staying home, because you go there, they give you a prescription, you cannot buy what they are prescribing. So people resort to their own forms of treatment. People resort to what somebody would call where there is no doctor. So you see, so we must address that issue by investing into agriculture and linking agricultural production to what I would call cottage industry or large-scale industrialization. We produce groundnuts and we sell them cheap. And when they go, they transform them into something else and send that something else to us and sell to us expensively. Why can't we just add value to our raw materials and sell them? We buy what we want ourselves and we export the rest.